Oh. Okay, that's fine.
Check.
Do you want to check?
Can you talk for a second?
Hello, hello, blah, blah, blah. Mark.
Yeah, it should be good then. If you want to put this one on that side.
Yeah. Tag on a rub, is it?
Go on, it's in the pocket then. I checked.
Yeah.
Again, just as a reminder, when you're finished using your plates and utensils, they go in the green bins in the back there. So welcome, everyone. We're celebrating Engineers Week here this week across the country, and special events that Northeastern's put together. We've had a number of fun events yesterday. The big culmination here on campus is our event today here, and we have a very special speaker that I'm happy to introduce to all of you, and I'm glad that we have so many of the students and faculty and staff here to participate in this, what I hope becomes an engaging kind of discussion. So Dr. Mark McBride-White is our guest today. He's the founder and managing director of Equal Engineers, a company offering a wide array of diversity and inclusion consultancy and training services for companies, and he's worked with many Fortune 50 companies. He was trained as an engineer, and we'll get into a little bit of his background either when he talks at the beginning or in discussion later on, but he's been recognized already in his career. He received the prestigious Rook Award from the Royal Academy of Engineering in July of 2022, and in June of 2023, he was awarded a Master of the British Empire, an MBE. So this does not, I just confirmed with him, this does not mean that we can call him sir yet. He has a couple more stages to go, but as you can see, he's got plenty of years to go. But he was given that recognition for his work in diversity, equity, and inclusion during the King's Birthday honors that was last year. He's currently a visiting professor of inclusive engineering leadership at University College London and author of the book, The Safe Leader. He may be talking about this, but you'll see there are little cards on your table. We would appreciate if you could click on that QR code, give some feedback on the presentation and discussion today, and your reward will be access to the free access to the electronic version of the book, which is scheduled to come out in May of this year. And Dr. McBride-White will be talking about that and other things, and I'm going to join you in the crowd here so I can see the slides as well as hear him. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gregory. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, I don't need to do my introduction anymore. So, I am Mark McBride-White. I'm a chemical engineer by training. That's my background. I studied chemical engineering at Imperial College London, and I specialized in carbon capture and storage during my PhD. I'm going to talk you through today a bit about my professional experience, my experience in education, but also my experience in industry and the work that I do now as an engineering entrepreneur, advocating for more accessibility and inclusivity in our profession. But I want to take you back pre-DEI. I should firstly say I am British, and I'm describing everything here from my context, my frame of reference. So there might be language that I use, things that I say, spellings that I've made that are, not in an American context. So please give me grace. It's with a positive intent that I'm with you here today. And I'm still on my learning journey for different groups that fit under our beautiful umbrella of diversity. And that's the spirit that I make all my conversations at. So I'm back in Imperial in 2009. I'm finishing my undergraduate degree, and I'm thinking ahead to what I want to do next. So I was applying for PhD programs. Now, this was, as I said, pre-DEI, my interest in DEI, and I applied to 4 different institutions in the UK, and one of the places I applied to was Imperial College London. The program was a 10-year investment from Qatar Petroleum to form what is called the Qatar Carbonates and Carbon Storage Research Center. $75 million over 10 years. I had a really good budget to spend on my initial kit, but I was nervous. I had just got engaged to my boyfriend, who I met while studying at Imperial, and, we were going to have our civil partnership in the years to come. But I was worried about having to go to the Middle East. It was the first time 2 aspects of my identity had come together, and it made me question, should I be doing this? Will I be safe? I had been out for quite a while, and I wasn't really willing to go to a position in life where I had to mask, I had to cover, I had to hide. That just wouldn't have sat comfortably with me. But I sat down with my prospective supervisor, and I said this. And he said, Mark, your contract will be with Imperial College. You will not have to go out if you don't want to. I'd encourage you to do so because it's a beautiful country, but we've got your back. So with that, I accepted the application, and I went on to have the enduring relationship with a PhD that many students who do them go on to have. I look back on that point in my life because it's 2 points. It was before I was even interested in diversity. I didn't even know what it was. And it was where 2 junctures in my life came together, and I could have gone in one of 2 different ways. And it's relevant because this is now 10 years on, and I use that example, I've been using that example more recently because LGBTQ rights in the Middle East, and Qatar and specifically, came up again last year, 2 years ago, at the World Cup, where footballers were wearing the band on their arm to show support, and it, wasn't welcome. So what I'm seeing now in social justice movements is whatever's happening outside the walls of our workplace or where we're studying, it's increasingly showing up more and more in the academic or industrial setting. And we need to be conscious of that as engineers. So my interest, as you can tell, lay in the energy industry. As part of my PhD, I secured a scholarship from the Department of Energy, the US Department of Energy, to spend 12 days in New Mexico, the University of New Mexico, on an exchange program. And I share with you as an example from a coal-fired power plant. So it's 2010, I'm at a coal-fired power plant outside Albuquerque in New Mexico, and a group of us are being shown around the facility. We get to the coal burners, and we're standing next to them, and we need to go up. We see the staircase, and we see the elevator. And the tour guide, the host, invites us all into the elevator. So like lemmings, we all just, walk into the elevator. And I'm at the back, and as I'm walking in, I'm thinking, oh, this is busy. This is busy. But I don't say anything. I get in, and if this is the square, I'm in the corner, right by the control panel. Press the button, sir. Okay. Press the button. Doors close. Bing. The lift starts to move. The elevator starts to move. And I'm standing in the corner there like, oh my God, please, let's just get out. Elevator goes up, stops. 20 people inside this small space, next to the coal burners. Temperature starts rising, and I'm like, be calm, be calm. And someone says, I think we should press the emergency button. And I'm thinking, I'm British, right? We don't like making a fuss. And I'm like, no, it'll be fine. The rational brain in me, it'll be fine. And then I'm thinking, Mark, you're in a lift, you're in an elevator. See, I'm doing it already, lift, elevator. You're in an elevator. Function should take you from one level to another. The end of the operation of an elevator is that the door should open and then you should be at your destination. I was not yet at my destination. So I start to panic. I start to try and keep calm. I managed to wedge the door open a little bit, got some air coming in, and the relief when we finally got to the final stop and the lift door opened. Out I came, and there I was. I genuinely thought that was it. I started to think, wow, am I going to faint? Am I going to die? Like, those were the thoughts that started going through my head. It was so stress-inducing. But like a lemming, I had just followed them in, even though I had had the thought, this doesn't look so safe. And actually, in safety, we often think that we'll rely on others to call things out and make things safe for us. But actually, what the bystander effect shows us is that the more people you have in a situation, the less likely anything is going to be abated or called out. And that's what we were moving into that elevator. So I moved into diversity, equity, inclusion in engineering, and I share this with you, this slide, as an example of the ceremony that I was at last year when I got my MBE award from Princess Anne at Windsor Castle in London. I specifically got it for services to diversity, equity, and inclusion in engineering. So I know my stuff. The business we're running is making impact, it's having change, and it's getting recognized. And I share this with you because, as you see, I am now a father. I have a son who's 5, and I have a daughter who is 4. She wasn't old enough to come to the ceremony. And in this photo is a picture of my husband, Sam, and my mum, Sandra. And I've been on my own journey with my mum, getting learned experience from people with disabilities, because she now, unfortunately, has to use a wheelchair to get around. So it was very interesting walking around Windsor Castle, pushing a wheelchair over cobbled stones and figuring out accessibility needs for getting there. But with the right inclusion, we can make things happen. So I want to take you back to my LGBTQ identity. I am gay. It's the one minoritized bucket that I fit into, and I'm also from a low socioeconomic background, first in generation to go to university. Other than that, I've got all the privileges going. Now, you'll find a lot of gay men in my age group. We've grown up with a lot of internalized shame, internalized homophobia. We've grown up in a context where you're told that it's not right, you should have a different route. And men in general, irrespective of sexual orientation, we're only really shown one emotional range, and that's anger, to manifest how we deal with emotions. So what it means to be a man is actually changing. There's a slow movement to try and bring down toxic masculinity and show a new way of what it means to be a man. And in engineering, we have a lot of men in the profession. And in my experience of running training with male majority groups, the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion can very quickly move to a them and us context, a polarizing, what about me type thing. So I want to just share that with you because we'll unpack that and explore that further. When I finished my PhD, I moved into industry and I started working at KBR, a large American employer based in Houston. And I tried to set up an LGBTQ network. We weren't ready for that, so instead, I decided to allocate my efforts to creating a cross-sector network group called Inter-Engineering to connect, inform, and empower LGBTQ engineers and supporters. That was one of the best decisions I ever made professionally because that ignited my passion for DEI and engineering. I went on to write reports for government. I went on to write reports for industry to consider collaboration. And what was a huge, huge moment of success was this picture at Pride in London in 2017, where we're marching down London with over 100 engineers behind us under a common banner. There had been no engineering businesses at Pride prior to Inter-Engineering. And it is through Inter-Engineering that we've brought together communities of advocates who are trying to make change in their businesses. It's because of us that Airbus went on to create a Pride at Airbus network. And the business went through the confidence levels of not willing to engage on such a topic through to really, truly embracing it and making it as part of their recruitment process and campaigns in terms of attraction. So I'm incredibly proud of what the team at Inter-Engineering has achieved. But in this journey, I realized the focus on each minority group wasn't quite working. We were leading to a very shallow conversation. So I had the ambition to set up a business that would apply equal focus to each strand of diversity. And that's the idea of where Equal Engineers came from. So we set the business up, but I was at a leadership meeting in 2018 it would have been. And it was a gender event. It was the Women in Construction Engineering Awards, and it was the leadership day. And I was on a panel on leadership, talking about leadership. 350 women in the room, all at the top of their game. And we started talking about how do we engage men in the conversation on DEI, in gender specifically, in women's networks. And I thought, I'm going to say something controversial here. I'm going to be a bit, push the button a bit. And I simply said, well, why don't we ask men? Why don't we put the spotlight on men? Expecting a whole bunch of pushback. How dare you suggest that we ask men, take the spotlight off the minoritized groups. But actually, what happened was the microphone went round the room, and we had about a 20-minute discussion about what structural gender inequality was leading couples to having to make decisions on as couples in a family unit. Structural gender pay gaps. The husband with the best intent doesn't want to go back to work, but is going to go back to work because he has the couple aren't willing to be financially worse off. And I'm aware that we have better parental leave rights in Europe and the UK than necessarily over here. So it was a very interesting point. Also, around about that time, we discovered the suicide rates in the construction, manufacturing, and process industries. So statistically, you're more likely to die through suicide than a typical hazard, like a dropped object falling from height, electrocution, things that as a safety engineer I used to spend time, money, and effort eradicating, minimizing. So I thought, well, hang on. If we've got this culture of belonging, surely anyone, and that's including white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, neurotypical men, would be able to be open about whatever the root causes in their life that might be driving this high instant rate of suicidal ideation and self-harm. So I didn't believe the data, though. I didn't believe the data. So we reran our own survey, ran our masculinity and engineering research, and saw those stats come through. And I'll come back to them in a moment. I wanted to share with you first some of the work that we've been doing with universities. So we decided to start expanding into the higher education space 2.5 years ago. We saw an opportunity to really help train up the students coming through so that we can speed up the rate of learning, the rate of appreciation of diversity, equity, inclusion in the profession. So we started working with universities to co-apply for funding, and this is an example of one project that we did with the University of Plymouth to help neurodivergent and disabled engineering students. It was absolutely incredible being able to convene a series of focus groups with 20 individuals from the School of Engineering, Computing and Mathematics, CCAM, and get their lived experiences of what it was like to be a student. We also included them in our mentoring program that we run at Equal Engineers with industry. And from this, we were able to garner some insights and share good practice across the school. But if I return now to the overall message that was driving the change at Equal Engineers, the masculinity and engineering research, we launched this research in 2018. We had over nearly 1,000 respondents, and in this data set, we asked questions related to diversity and inclusion, but also identity and also experience. We're rerunning the survey this year, actually. We've done it twice, once in 2018, once in 2021, where the publication then came out the year later. That's why it says 2019 on the report there. But I want to share with you the stats that really made me pivot and made me change. Bearing in mind, I just told you that I did not believe the data from the original Office of National Statistics. 1 in 5 engineers reported losing a work colleague to suicide. 1 in 5. In that survey, 1 in 5 also reported suicidal ideation or self-harm. In the 2021 refresh of this data set, the number went up to 1 in 4. 1 in 4. And some of the written questions, the written responses were heart-wrenching. So we have a mental health emergency in engineering. And as a safety engineer, where my job used to be to create physically safe working environments and helping organizations enable that for people to thrive, we wouldn't ever tolerate such a high incident rate like this. Ever. We would design it out. That's what we do as engineers. We design out risk. We make things safe. And where we have residual risk, we manage it through processes, procedures, and methodologies, and work methods, and training, et cetera, et cetera. So isn't the intention, though, of inclusion, belonging, creating a place where you can be your whole self, bring your whole self to work? That's what we say it is, right? Well, clearly it's not working for a certain group, so we need a new way. And these are the people who, in the current setup, hold positions of power and privilege in power structures, and that are the ones that will accelerate change if they feel some empathy to the DEI conversation. So I saw an opportunity here to take the familiarity that engineers have with safety and extrapolate that, physical safety, technical safety, and extrapolate that into psychological safety. And that's really where the work in The Safe Leader has come about, the book that I'm here to promote and talk about. We've developed a framework around that where SAFE stands for share, act, feel, and empower. The idea being that you have to dig deep into your personal experience first and foremost to understand what your diversity story is, what your difference is, so you've then got something to share with the world. You then have to take action in sharing that story, but also being willing to learn about the lived experiences of others. You are inherently limited to your own experience on this planet, and that's the only reference point you have. We have to make an effort in order to enrich our inner circle, our trusted 10, so to speak. And there's some exercises that prove that. We have to create a feeling of empowerment as well. So trying to mobilize the workforce to feel empowered. And in the world, in the workforce, there is a pendulum swing. You might have heard, has anyone heard of this analogy before, the pendulum, when we relate to culture? So I love it because, again, it's an engineering idiom. There's already so much in our engineering language that we can use to repurpose for DEI. It's probably my second book that I want to write. Let's scrape together engineering analogies and write that book. But the pendulum idea is that if you swing too far forward in one direction, majority groups perceive that too much equity has been given out, the brakes come on, and we start to swing back. And the key, being a social justice advocate by stealth, that's what I like to think of myself as, is to stop the pendulum from swinging back too far from where our original starting point was. Because things will continue to get better, but the longer you live on this earth, the more you start to recognize that progress isn't linear, it isn't constant. You have some momentum, and then you stall a bit. You have some momentum, and then you stall a bit. But one of the key things I've learned in life is that nothing endures. Change is one of the things that is guaranteed and will always remain constant. So in the context now, I'm conscious that I'm here in a very spiky debate that's going on around DEI, and is it appropriate, is it inappropriate, are some majority groups being excluded at the expense of other groups? My belief is that we fundamentally just need engineers. Because mental health, mental ill health, the types of stuff that I've been describing here doesn't discriminate on the grounds of anything. It can affect anyone at any time. And in engineering, we need more engineers. There's a skills shortage, period. Over 20% of the UK engineering workforce is expected to retire in the next 5 years. So it's a simple chemical engineering mass balance. We've got more coming out than what's coming in, so we're not in a state of accumulation to share knowledge and wisdom experience. So as long as we align our DEI efforts around that wrapper, around skills, around the need for people, I think we'll be safe in continuing to do our good work. So I wanted to very quickly visit one of the concepts of safety engineering that we've applied to help bring this idea of culture. So in engineering, over the years, we are now doing more hazardous operations. We're drilling for oil in higher pressure, higher temperature areas, farther offshore. And a lot of technologies now carry greater risk as well. But lost time incident rates, so this is a metric that companies report to OSHA, to the UK Health and Safety Executive. It's a metric that they report for the number of worker hours occurred or worked without something happening that led to them having to shut down operations. It's a bit like recording the number of fatalities and all that as well. So you'll see that back in the day, before the Industrial Revolution, or when we started making things at scale, workplaces weren't very safe. It was acceptable to have 9-year-olds work 16-hour days in the workplace. That was acceptable. But over time, with legislation that's been enacted, that became unacceptable. So with regard to how we respond to safety, back in the past, we would respond on our natural instincts. So we talk about this with our sort of biases, our amygdala that's at the core of our brain. You know, we have inbuilt responses to things when we're in fight or flight situations. It's what used to protect us from saber-toothed tigers back in the past. You know, sometimes if you're on your bike or you're driving and you have a quick reaction, you don't consciously make that reaction. It's your reactive instincts coming in here. And that's how people used to react in incidents in the past. We recognized that some things were not acceptable, so we started introducing legislation, compliance. We keep people safe because we're told we have to do it. So it's a compliance-driven approach to safety. And then we started recognizing, oh, actually, you know, we're living longer and I'm getting injured less in the workplace. So we do it for our own self-preservation. So incident rates are continue to come down, and this has become more of the culture. I'm proactively taking this seriously because I want to keep myself safe. And then the final stage in the Bradley curve is people do it because it's the right thing to do. We look out for others. We create safe teams by keeping one another safe. The Bradley curve was developed by DuPont in the 1980s, 1990s to help conceptualize this. And as I said, as we've got more high-risk operations, we're still doing things safer. But the rates have plateaued. Obviously, getting this to zero, it's an exponential decay tending towards zero. Obviously, in exponential decays, you never get to zero. That's the utopia. But things have genuinely plateaued. And so I feel there is an opportunity here to take the concept of the Bradley curve and add a bit onto it that I'm calling safe teams, looking at inclusive interdependence. And if you let me, I'll explain to you what I mean by this. I have a slight issue with the concept of allyship. Firstly, I'm not a fan of the word allyship because it makes it sound like we're at war with one another. You know, the word ally came from the Second World War. So I usually use the word supporter, but, you know, that's just language. Also, if I'm an ally for you, you're expecting me to do it out of the goodness of my heart. That requires work on my part. And, you know, are all humans egalitarian and going out their way to do things for the betterment of others? We like to think that we are, but most times we're not. I think we need to reframe the concept of allyship slightly in that being an ally is actually good for me. It's good for you. Because what that means is that we're collectively driving up the standard. Because I know that if I'm looking out for you, then you're going to look out for me. And that's not quite captured in the essence of Stage 4 safe teams. So I want you to think about that in that example that I gave about being a lemming and just following the crowd. If you're ever in a moment and you see something happen that doesn't look right, take the appropriate action and call it out. Because again, in safety engineering, that is what you are emboldened to do, whether you are the chief executive, the dean, a new grad student that's just started, or an apprentice on a site. If you see something that's happening that could put someone's physical safety at risk, you call it out. You stop it. Doesn't matter if it's going to cost us millions of dollars of lost time stuff. You call it out. The same applies to microaggressions, micro-inequities. Microaggressions and micro-inequities, so the small unsaid things that reinforce someone's place in the hypothetical pecking order, death by 1,000 cuts, so to speak. They're the equivalent of small workplace incidents that often just get, oh, let's not bother with that. Slips, trips, and falls, you know. We need to keep the standard high, and we need to be looking out for one another. But that requires you to do the work to get to understand the lived experiences of others. And the way we're naturally wired, we don't often do that. So I'd encourage you to go to a student society of a group to which you do not belong. I've had the privilege this morning of visiting some incredible researchers and seeing some incredible students. You've got a wealth of diversity of experience and background simply within the walls of Northwestern. Northeastern. We'll edit that out, sorry. So I want to give you an example of where this works. So it's 2016, I'm at a railway depot just outside London, and I'm delivering some of our inclusive cultures training. The HR team bring the engineers in, they sit down, they cross their arms. I don't want to be here. It's what their body language is saying. And I was like, hello, I'm not holding you hostage here. You can leave, you know. I want to enjoy this too. And as the session started, and I started talking about and framing DEI in the way that I've been doing so here, the body language relaxed. The physicality opened up, and they leaned forward. They started listening. And it was around about the time of Brexit, you know, when we made that amazing decision to, you know, go off on our own and bye. But anyway. And one of the guys in there just started going on and on about Brexit. It wasn't an issue. What's the big deal? We're given too much spotlight. And his counterpart was quiet. He was silent. He was sat there not saying anything. And he started opening up, and he said, you know, when I go home at night, my wife is Polish, and I've been going home at night, and she is in tears. She is sad, she's upset, she doesn't know what this means. Are we going to be deported? Is she going to get indefinite leave to remain? Is she going to have to reapply for her job? Are we going to have to spend time apart? You know, she's in tears, and he has to contain it for her. But when he comes into the workplace, zip, he doesn't say anything. And it's been like that for a good few months, with his colleague rabbiting on and on. And in that moment in the room, when his colleague is rabbiting on and on, he turns to him and he says, look, you have no idea what I'm going through at home. I have had enough of you. My wife has been in tears, and I've been containing it for her, and I've had enough. I was like, whoa, okay. I brought his attention back to me, and I said to him, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me. That was brave. He felt heard. So what happened in that training session, what happened in that moment, was a connection that men don't often have together. Because we come into the workplace, we do our thing, and off we go. The guys were able to resolve that and then, you know, build greater relations from there. And that was the benefit of sharing. So getting people to share, getting our workplaces to share was very, very powerful. The guys came up to me at the end of it and they said, Mark, I did not think we were going to be here today talking on that stuff, but we feel great. Thank you so much. You've brought us closer together. We're going to take it from here. So doing this work in building safe teams requires us to get under the skin and create that trusting environment where people are willing to share, where people are willing to hear, and where people are willing to act and be kind and be empathetic. Sort of like, you know, shaking it off. Shake. So, what are we doing at Equal Engineers? We started our Pathways program, which is our student development program to bring students from minoritized backgrounds through the pipeline. And the training that we deliver to the engineers that I just described, they're our mentors. So they're getting a chance to challenge their preconceptions on what the lived experience is like of a student from a minoritized background. They're getting a chance to live it. They're getting a chance to practice the theory, and what we're creating then is knowledge sharing between the generations and ultimately helping the students move into employment, because that's what it's all about. We need students to move into engineering roles. And unfortunately, statistics, students from the underrepresented groups do not transfer into employment at the same rate as more privileged counterparts. So there's work to do in that space. And that's what we're working on with our Pathways program. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all heavy work. You know, DEI work is heavy. You know, we need a bit of a break sometimes. So we launched in 2020 our Engineering Talent Awards, where we have 14 categories, 7 individual, 7 organizational, and we run it, we've been running it annually since. And this is a picture from our 2023 ceremony. And some of our students, some of our graduates, given them that platform, they've gone on and achieved fantastic things. Our 2021 graduate, Mohammed Tahir, his number of followers on Instagram surpassed Heathrow Airport. He's called Motivate. I don't know if any of you follow him. He's had millions of views on his behind-the-scenes videos of Heathrow Airport. I mean, he's been everywhere. And he flew on the inaugural flight of Sir Richard Branson with sustainable aviation fuel. And he's now an independent digital media consultant. But the ETA award that he won in 2020 gave him that platform and is helping him grow from there. And we've got many other examples of that on our website, of people who've won. So, safe leadership. I want to feel like you've learned it. So let's say the letters together, yeah? And I should know them, shouldn't I? Because I'm the author of the book. Right. What does the S stand for? Share. That's not loud enough. Come on, I'm in America. This is the voice of loudness. Share. Share. Act. Act. Feel. Empower. Power. Right. And I'm going to throw this one in here because it's the one I used to do in my old talk. This isn't conducive for a book title, but we're going to talk about shake. So stand up if you can, or be in your seat, and we're going to reinforce a different angle on the talk. So this is called the shake model, okay? So similar words. We're going to share. Share. We're going to hear. Hear. We're going to act. We're going to be kind. We're going to have empathy. We're going to shake. Come on, give it a shake. Fantastic. And it's not just professional. It's also personal. Because like I said, I'm a dad, I'm a father, and I have a son and a daughter. And after bath time, we play this game called The Hungry Caterpillar. Has anyone ever read The Hungry Caterpillar? Yeah, see some nodding heads. So when we get out the bath, I take Hunter through his bedroom, he's wrapped up in his towel, and he sits down, and we have to play the Hungry Caterpillar game. So I'm like, okay, right, Hunter. So he curls up in a ball, and I have to place the towel over him. But before that, we say, one day, the Hungry Caterpillar ate 1 apple, 2 bananas, 3 strawberries, until he was full. And then he needed to make a cocoon. So Hunter wraps himself up in a ball on the floor, and I place the towel over him. And the caterpillar eats 1 piece of lettuce to settle his tummy. Dada, you forgot the cake. Oh, okay. And the caterpillar had some cake. And then one day, the caterpillar starts to move. The cocoon starts to move, starts to shake. And one day, the caterpillar bursts out the cocoon and flaps its wings and, flies away. And with that, Hunter takes the towel off and he flaps his wings all around the room, butt naked, being free. And I see the way that as a society, we start to place expectations on young 5-year-old boys in terms of their self-expression. We start to box them in. And I invite you to consider if at any point you've not felt safe and you've not felt like you're able to express yourself, where you felt tight, shackled, constricted, all you got to do is shake it off, right? So, with that, I've written the Safe Leader where we've synthesized all these thoughts into there. I'd like to offer you a complimentary copy of the book, the ebook, when it's available. So please give your feedback through the QR code on there. We are doing some work now to bring it into universities as well as a training concept. But thank you so much. You've been a great audience, and I look forward to some questions.
Thanks, Mark. So I have a few questions to kind of kick this off, but we have some could I actually have someone move those microphones a little closer to the crowd? Hopefully that won't cause too much acoustic nightmare. But if at any point you have anything you want to share, or a question or any kind of comment, we welcome this as a kind of discussion. We have about a half an hour here for this discussion. I had a number of questions I had prepared, but in the first time we spoke, I was talking about some of the efforts that we've started and lead here at Northeastern, and you can see, well, we had various affinity groups, reserved tables here, and you made a comment about the pros and cons of what you referred to as the strand-by-strand approach to DEI, and I wonder if you could just expound a little bit on that.
So we still need safe spaces for groups to come together and have community. But we need to create these communities where they're porous. See, again, another engineering term, I love it. So porosity is where you can come in and out of a rock. You know, if a rock that's porous means water can flow through it. So I always see our network groups as not exclusive, but inclusive. And people can come into them. They understand that our network group exists for a reason. There's a certain way within which, rules are made and the internal politics of the network, but we are open to inviting you in. Come, learn about what we do, our culture, what we stand for, what are some of the barriers that we go through, and we can train you up to be a supporter, an ally of our community. So I'm not a believer that everything's a meritocracy and actually we should disband specific groups, because unfortunately we'll just swing right back with that pendulum and not make any progress. But we need to also not run our networks as exclusive and not willing to go on that journey to help people change and shift their mind, because generally the sentiment with where people are on a lot of this stuff is that they feel like they're walking on eggshells. The most powerful slide I use when I work with leaders is a picture of a foot walking on some eggshells. It articulates how people feel with groups which they do not belong to. It might even articulate how you feel when you start thinking more laterally about what you are not. And I'd invite you to then lean into that, get curious, and start finding people who are of that identity and ask them. Watch TED Talks of people who are of that identity and upskill. When I set up Engineering, I didn't knowingly know any trans people. All I knew was stuff that I'd read in the newspapers, tropes from growing up, in terms of what trans people are, and that was it. But I knew if I was setting up an organization, because our two communities interconnect usually, we needed to represent that group. So I invited people, I reached out on LinkedIn, went to some trans networking events, and met people who kindly shared their story with me. So much so that I now feel like I can never speak on behalf of that community, but I'm certainly a lot more informed than just what I've read in the media and having no lived experience of it. I now have learned experience from a diverse group of individuals. And I'm on that learning journey now. I feel very confident when I'm talking about LGBTQ+, because that part of that is me. But with the expansion of Equal Engineers into other networking groups, I feel like I'm walking on those eggshells, I feel like I'm walking on those eggshells. But I know I have to push through that, show my positive intent, and learn. So we have neurodiversity networks now. We have disability networks now. I met one of your professors earlier who is blind, working in the biomedical engineering department. Absolutely incredible. the work that she's been doing. And I know fine well from experience, when people come into that room, I bet you no one asks her about her devices and the tools that she uses to go about doing her job. So I did that, and she just lit up. She became enthusiastic, she got everything down. We were doing, using tactile mods to, make different molecules. It was absolutely incredible. So when you can tap into someone's identity and their passion and get curious about it, people will share. And I'd encourage you to do likewise, with who you are. The thing with white, cis, het, straight, cisgendered men, etc., is that because of the layers of privilege, we have to dig a bit deeper to get to those experiences where we've maybe been excluded at some point in life. And often when I'm showing the iceberg slide of, beneath your waterline, and you're so much more than what you can see from the surface, when you start showing that a workplace culture is about being able to be open about any turbulence, whether it's financial planning, gambling, addiction issues, whether it's struggling to come out at work, or fertility issues, I know that when I'm on that stage broadcasting that message, I am reaching out into the minds of that white male majority and touching on a nerve of something on that spectrum. And that's when they start to get it. That's when they start to peel back and think, oh, wow, okay, so this inclusion and belonging stuff means that I can get help and support on that thing right now that's causing me to mask, cover, hide when I'm in the workplace setting. And that's the key. Then we can have the conversation on the experience of minoritized groups. What it feels like to be the only black engineer on your course, or in the closet at work, or struggling with your gender identity, or a new neurodivergent diagnosis or something. So I just think we're not avoiding the awkward conversation of systemic racism, misogyny, homophobia, all the isms in engineering, but we're starting it from a strategy that is likely to not turn off the majority group who we need on side to enact the change that we need. Yeah.
So our audience here, we have a lot of students, we have faculty and staff. I wanted to ask you a little bit of particular advice for the students here. Northeastern is renowned for its co-op program, which gives our students a tremendous leg up in being able to understand what kind of career they want when they graduate. But they still have to start somewhere. And I've spoken to many students who have been frustrated by the process of interviewing and trying to find this first co-op position. And I imagine, because I am connected to a particular underrepresented group with the children I raise, that there are often this balance between proving yourself valuable as an engineer, but also being concerned about representing your true self or protecting your true self from an employment situation that you might want to avoid. I wonder what advice you can give to people as they approach the interview process. And then I'm going to have you flip that from the company's perspective.
Yeah. So I would say be honest and be open in the interview process. Especially if you need any sort of adjustments or accommodations, if you have some sort of disability or something that would help make the process more aligned for you, be honest about that. Because if the employer doesn't know, then they don't know. They can't help you. And there's a legal requirement in the UK, certainly, under the Equality Act, to support people, to make it more equitable to gain access to employment opportunities in that way. So if you are not open and true on the application, if those questions are asked, then you're kind of not really truly evaluating the employer in terms of how authentic they are, and are they supporting you? Can they support you? Do they support you? Do your research. Look up on their site how representative are their board. How do they report on diversity? What do they report on diversity? Is it just the bare minimal legal requirement on, gender composition or gender pay? Have they decided to be an early adopter of ethnicity pay gaps? Or, what are they doing in their annual report or their sustainability report? Do your research, because you're interviewing them as well. Look up what awards they've won. Look up role models on LinkedIn. if they have any employee networks, employee resource groups, business resource groups, affinity networks, they have different names in different places, but essentially the groups of people that are of that shared identity, and reach out to them on LinkedIn, ask, find out, be a bit of a detective. And then therefore when it comes to the actual application process, you just got to endure it. You got to go through it. It's difficult, it's hard. I think there's an imbalance. Like there's probably a much bigger project, Gregory, to help support supply and demand. Some of the large employers get thousands of applications for only tens or hundreds of roles, but some of the small medium enterprises that certainly in the UK account for about 90% of the overall engineering workforce, so massive, they can't compete with the big brands that indoctrinate you whilst you're on campus, with marketing and advertising and come and work for us and all the swag. So you, well, I don't want to call you lemmings, but you think, wow, the standard's here, I need to apply for these things, and if I don't get a job at that big brand, then I've not made it, Actually, you can have an incredible career working in an SME. So be creative in how you do your job search. Look at the supply chains of the big industries up here, or the geography with where you want to work. Look up what the big industries are and who the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers are, and can you get a job there? And I guarantee if you work in an SME, we are an SME, equal engineers, and my team do a whole raft of different things. No one's in their sort of one lane, so to speak. So you get some diversity in your the focus of your job.
I'm not sure our audience understands what SME is.
Small medium enterprise. Yeah. I did try and define that
right,
a few sentences ago. That's what I mean by that.
Great. So now could you flip that, and what advice do you give to employers?
For employers, I would say be creative in your outreach. Partner with universities to try and fill your talent pipeline earlier than needed. If you take part in our Pathways program, and mentor young engineers coming through. Get involved with the engineering curriculum. Come in and give guest keynote speeches, keynote lectures. Get involved in the assessment. Start to know who the students are, so that when the applications show up in your HR team's inbox, you already know what they're like, So yeah, I would say for engineers, for your continuing professional development, it's good to get involved with on-campus activities and involve students in projects. I think for those employers that just have such a huge potential supply of demand for roles than the amount of roles they're able to supply to the workforce in terms of opportunities, we need to think long and hard about the filters that we're putting in to try and make that sifting process easier, and recognize that some methods like assessment centers or psychometric tests, they're not always the most conducive to people of certain conditions, or they don't necessarily excel the best in that. And I know some big companies are really testing and trialing different approaches. Some companies have reduced the requirement for a certain level of degree, because, if you get 59% versus 61% for a 2.2 or a 2.1, there are grading systems in the UK I'm using there. What does it matter, So some are testing with removing certain level requirements, and then focus more on the skills-based assessment. So competency-based assessment, skills-based assessment is another crucial one. So rather than relying upon what experience do you have or what have you done, you're playing into people's privilege there and their ability to secure roles. And if mum and dad work at some big engineering employer and you've managed to get an internship or a co-op there on the back of that connection, that isn't a great way to create an equitable access to opportunities. So instead, look at the tasks that you want the students to be doing once they come into the workplace, and design an assessment process that queries how they would approach that task, and judge based on that. That's skills-based recruitment assessment over competency-based assessment.
So you talked earlier about this pendulum effect, and it's clear the way the pendulum is swinging now in many parts of the world. And I was recently at a forum where one of the a U.S. Congresswoman was talking about how we as universities should react in this time period, and she said, "Stay strong." To which I stood up and said, "That's not enough. Okay. What is it we need to do? What is it we can do to not shy away from our beliefs of what we need to do to create a more diverse and inclusive culture, despite political forces that might, that are making that more difficult?" So what are some, and you don't know enough about the U.S. political climate, so you can do this in the context of the UK, because I'm sure there will be a way to translate it, but what advice do you give to universities to what they can do in this kind of climate where there are exterior forces that are trying to get them to reverse some work?
Yeah. I think, so focus on the long game. Focus on the talent of the future. Like I said in my talk, change, nothing endures. I was actually invited to a roundtable last June with Sir Keir Starmer, who's the current Labour leader, so the opposition party in power in the UK, potentially our future Prime Minister. And at this roundtable, I said to him, you need to think about the long game here, the long planning, not just the next 5-year election cycle if you get elected. You need to be thinking about the generations coming through now, Generation Alpha. You know, I was by far the youngest person in the room at this lunch, and my son and daughter are Generation Alpha. We're talking increasingly more about Generation Z, but our net zero targets that we globally have to meet take us to Generation Alpha entering the workforce. So we need to be thinking about those people coming in and working backwards from 2050 to now, and think about the way that our population is changing in terms of its identity through data that we're getting from, you know, census and what have you, and recognize that the value set of this groups are going to play into the culture of the future. So I would say, because something like over 20% of Americans now in the Gen Z 16 to 25 bracket identify as something other than straight. That's huge. That is enormous, you know. So universities are a constant. They are a constant. Political parties will change, leadership will change, the pendulum will swing with different momentum and inertia, you know, but stay the course. Be strong, but then think about, and this is really for you, Gregory, and your peers and above, the leadership that you're showing to those in the room. You know, what you stand for then dictates what will be where the bar is set culturally across the campus and across engineering in general. So very often I meet leaders that are, again, nervous about how they're going to be perceived when they show up. They forget about their leadership shadow that they cast across into the very darkest places on the campus or in the organization. And it's about empowering them to be willing to showcase that willingness to learn, and therefore it gives permission to the wider workforce to mimic that. You know, it's a very strong, powerful force in male-majority teams using the influence of hierarchy. And if you've got an inclusive leadership team and a leadership team that are really trying to break the mold and show that they're wanting to learn and they're trying different approaches to make culture change, that then is a passport to, it sends a message to those below them, the people managers, etc., on how to support these groups. So yeah, stay the course. Be strong, but then think about your internal culture and therefore the leaders that you're training for the future moving out into industry.
I want to invite or welcome anyone from the audience to just share any thoughts they might have. If you have a question or any kind of personal reflection based on what you've heard here today. Yeah, just step up to one of the microphones. Just introduce yourself quickly and then fire away.
Yeah, thank you for a great talk. My name is Rio. I'm a first-year PhD student at Northeastern. I moved to Boston in September, so this is my first-year PhD. And I just want to ask you a little bit about could you share a little bit of your vision, if you have any, in terms of diversity inclusion in academia specifically? Because oftentimes, like, I went through undergrad in Oregon, and I came here as a grad student. The culture of undergrad and grad is very different. There is its own category of a struggle that we went through. And then especially in PhD program, I feel like it becomes up to us to engage with other people. It's up to us to talk with other people. And in a struggle that people go through, it's pretty unknown for a very long time until someone's open up. And then the conversation is, oh, I wish you told me.
Yeah.
That's very proactive, reaction that we have. So do you have any vision that you have in academia specifically to improve this quality of life of students, both physically and mentally, as well as the support from the faculty member or within the lab? Just could you talk about that in
Yeah, sure. It's a big area. It's the relationship that unless you've done a PhD, it's a strange experience, because it's probably the only time in your life where you'll be working with someone or a couple of people, if you've got co-supervisors, where there's so much control over your time and your destiny is really determined based on your relationship with them and how well you perform. So I specifically sought out co-supervision so that I had that diversity, someone more pastoral type arrangement, one that was more technical and focused on the day-to-day. At a minimum, I would always advocate for having co-supervision as the standard. That's one thing. Building up a peer group of, I graduated from my PhD in 2013, so 10 or 11 years ago now. Now in the UK, there's actually almost like development programs for PhD students where they actually have to do technical skills training, or soft skills. I don't like using soft skills, but they have to do additional training in parallel with their PhD technical work, but they do that in partnership with other PhD students that have joined their course, joined the department at a similar time. So that's one way to get you away from behind your apparatus or your computer, because it's easy to just sink all your hours into the lab and just get lost in, the research and the focus. So that's one way I would say, is to build community amongst your peers, have co-supervision, but then also it's a great idea for faculty to invest in training and development for people leaders, for supervisors in academia on how to support research students. I always find with academia, and I'm not aware of the composition of the workforce here, but very often in engineering or science departments, your academics, your professors, your lecturers are your gateway to what it's like beyond engineering. But actually, a lot of people who are academics have only ever worked in academia. It's only a small percent that have actually worked in industry and then came back. So you get this skewed perspective of what life is like beyond your years that you're doing here, the passport that you're going to get through this brilliant degree. So I'd encourage you in the flow of doing the PhD to try and secure, work shadowing or go and spend a day at an employer where you might want to work in the future. So it really does come down to taking ownership for your own development, but also the institution putting policies and procedures and structures in play that minimizes any one individual having that control over your future, because that's where it's risky. And there should be safe ways for you to escalate should anything go awry. So yeah, some guardrails in that respect.
Thank you.
Yeah, just step up to the microphone if you have something.
Sorry, you spoke about learning about others in DEI outside of personal backgrounds, and a lot of times those DEI members have clubs and settings that exist to create a safe space for members who share a subcategory of identities, whether that be to create solidarity amongst each other, but also to just have a separate space away from larger social identities. And so my question is, how does someone of a larger social identities, typically white, heterosexual, cisgender, neurotypical males, approach those spaces without unintentionally violating those spaces as well?
It's important to know if the forum within which you're looking to go is an event that's being run as a safe space. You know, I'm contradicting myself here slightly. You know, running a network or a group, you should reserve the right to run events that are exclusive for your audience. You know, because as you say, there'll be stuff you want to talk about, stuff you want to share. But I would challenge a little bit back on it in that it should be clear to who the audience is for the thing that you're running as to whether or not they're welcome and to come in. For the type of individual that you're describing, don't be put off by that perception that you have of that you will be unwelcome. Reach out to maybe the chair of the network. You know, show a willingness that you want to engage, but be sensitive. Ask the best way. You know, showing up at the event when it starts might not be the best way to do it. Maybe a more phased approach where you're able to support the network in some way through sponsorship or through lending your name to support some of the events that they're running. Obviously, I'm talking here about people that are high up. If you're a peer on the same level, I would say just ask members, informally ask. Really want to find out about your culture, about your community. Would I be welcome? What's the next event I can come along to? Or could you tell me some resources that I can read? Could I help in some way? How could I be in service to your community? I want to understand, I want to learn. And then figure out ways to help that learning take place as a network.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. Absolutely loved it. And I actually, when you spoke about your experiences going to Qatar, to a country where you started questioning how safe you felt about being who you are. So I come from India, and it's, again, one of those countries that's obviously made a lot of progress in terms of accepting people from different diverse backgrounds and in terms of sexuality, disability, everything. But while we're talking about academia here, everything starts when you're in undergrad or like when you come to a place where you have a little more exposure. As an international student that's come here, I love that I get to educate myself, something that I never got through undergrad. But it is very important because if you have no education about it, you're not going to know how to perceive things at workplace. Like, you know, you start your master's or you go to a company, like you graduate in India and you go to a company, you don't know what it is. It's just something as part of CSR or like company policy that most MNCs wish to include as part of employee engagement, right? Mm-hmm. I have actually been pondering a lot over how we could talk about it in India because now people are starting to get a little more open about it. And as an alumna, I want to make a slight impact by talking to people of like my alma mater, go to the board and talk to them saying, hey, let's educate because I think the general perception of several engineering colleges, almost all of them, and India produces about 1.5 million engineers every single year. Wow. So that's a lot, and we have absolutely no knowledge about it, except for, say, Instagram. But again, I think there's something about formally being trained and educated on these things. So how do you think I could make an impact and try to convince, despite all, I would say there's a little bit of taboo. There's also bureaucracy involved in it, and a lot of formal procedures.
Yeah. You have to be culturally sensitive to the context within which you're looking to enact change. The Airbus example that I gave earlier, when I deliver a lecture annually at Imperial College in London to the mechanical engineering department, And I gave the example where the journey that we'd gone on with Airbus, they became so confident in their ability to influence change that when India considered recriminalizing homosexuality in 2015-16, actually Airbus got involved and used its political might, used its influence, because they're a big employer in certain regions, to say this is not okay, we wouldn't stand for it. I got challenged by one of the students in that forum by thinking, well, you're taking a very Western approach to that. How did you consider the locals? What were their viewpoints? You know, there's a bit of kind of white saviorism coming in there with how I described that example. So that really made me think, well, isn't it obvious? Like, it's a good thing that it's not happened. But what your strength could be is helping communicate the cultural norms and how, if you think there are things that have worked in this context or in other contexts that could then apply to your nation, there needs to be a certain way within which that is then strategized such that it is effective. Because there'll be some things that if you take a certain approach, it'll just fall flat on its feet. You know, it'll just not work. So I think that's the kind of mapping exercise, the work to do. I actually looked at, for launching this book, you know, specifically at different markets for, you know, doing podcasts and tours and that. It is my hope, given the number that you mentioned there, 1.5 million engineers a year, given that a lot of Indian people do speak English as well and the history there, I'd like to take some of these concepts over to India because it's quite a, pardon the pun, safe way to have the conversation because it's quite neutral, it's quite balanced, but we can take it into the different diversity groups. But we can also make it about the engineering as well. And I think if we can make it about the engineering, there are two ways to influence people, engineers, on diversity and inclusion. It's the thing that we are engineering and the end output and impact on society. So thinking about diverse groups, user experience and all that. But there's also the process of doing the engineering, the team that you're working in, the culture of the organization or department that you're in, and looking out for one another and all the things we've described. So I think you could be a cultural conduit for figuring out how do I filter some of these messages, what would work in the Indian Institute of Technology, for example, versus, so I think that could be your power, having worked in well, I haven't met you, I'm just assuming, you know, worked in a couple of different geographies.
Thank you.
So why don't you join me in thanking Mark for his...
Thank you.
And I have something for you, Mark. So there's a little story that evolved only during your talk. So I'm going to give you this nice little fleece.
Oh.
To put on, and you will notice, emblazoned on this, it says Northeastern.
Oh, not
University, right?
Northwestern.
So I got to tell you, I made that slight miscue during my interview for the dean position, and the president came back and said, "You get to do that once." But I learned there's a way to remember whether to say Northeastern or Northwestern. Okay, Northwestern is in Chicago. Northeastern is almost everywhere else in the United States and Canada. So. Yeah, you're an engineer, you understand numbers, just say Northeastern all the time and you're almost always going to be right. So, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
That's great. Brilliant. Does that fit okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Quick photo